Hi. So I just got back from a 5-day work trip in Chicago, and I wanted to talk about something really practical, real life. And how do you actually live this out when you are out of your routine, and how to not derail. I'm Lisa, and this is Second Peak Midlife. Welcome back. So this used to be something that would completely derail me. A work trip like this would just throw everything off. And not just physically, but mentally and spiritually. I would just spiral out of control in a bad way. And so I paid attention this time just so that I could share with you how I handle it now, and maybe you can get some benefit out of it. But what did I actually do? So before I left, I did 3 days in a row of lifting and weighted vest treadmill. And normally I wouldn't do that. I'd rest between my lift days. But I knew that I was going into 5 days of kind of unpredictability, and so I tried to prepare myself that way. And then when I got there, right after I checked into my hotel, I looked up where Whole Foods was, and I walked 15 minutes to the Whole Foods store and got what I needed for breakfast and lunch. And not only did it help me stay on track, but it actually saved the company a lot of money in reimbursement, because that breakfast buffet is like $30, and all I was going to get was eggs and fruit. So I got what I usually make at home, and so they sell these prepackaged boiled eggs that are already peeled. I got 2 sumo oranges, pineapple, cottage cheese, Greek yogurt, some seed crackers, and these little flatbed bread crackers, and a Mitica date and walnut cake. It's only 2 ingredients, and it's a really cool, small, sweet treat, and some Hue chocolate and some sparkling water, because I know what works for me. And that's the biggest thing that I've learned, is I know my gut now, and I know what makes me feel good and what doesn't. And it didn't come from guessing. It came from just stripping everything back. That's what I learned from carnivore, and slowly adding things in was what my gut can tolerate. And so I don't experiment anymore when I travel. I stick close to what I know works for me. And I also bring some things from home. I bring my supplements. I bring extra amino acids, because I never know if I'm going to get enough protein with meals that are already pre-planned. Matcha tea, fiber powder, there's one that I can tolerate. I bring my resistance bands and my workout clothes. And I used to bring a yoga mat, but it's too bulky because I only travel with a carry-on. And I don't like to go to hotel gyms usually, especially not when I could run into people that I know. It's just my thing. That's why I have my own home gym. You know, some people enjoy going to the gym as a social thing, but I never have. For me, it's like I need this private haven. And so in hotels, I work out in my room. It's simple, and every morning I try to wake up at my normal time, which is 5:15 to 5:30, and I have my morning drink, which has electrolytes and creatine and some other things, and I'll try to link what supplements I use in a link below. But I have a neat little container tower, and I have one for the road and one that I use at home. So each day's mix is ready, and it has this little pour spout on it, so it makes it super easy, and bulletproof coffee. And then I go into my Bible study and prayer, and that's really what matters the most, because I didn't just pray about the meetings. I prayed about my posture, that I would stay in my clinical lane and wouldn't try to control the outcomes, and that I would speak when it was appropriate, and that I would listen carefully, and that I would control my tongue if I had a thought that wasn't in my role to answer, and I would defer that to the decision makers whose role that was. And also that I wouldn't get pulled into gossip on the floor with other reps, and that I would serve people well and release the outcomes, because they're not up to me. And that was a big one, because as you know, I've spent a lot of my life trying to control outcomes. So I try to surrender that to God every morning. And then I exercise and I would do yoga on a phone app with resistance bands, and then calisthenics, usually push-ups and squats and sit-ups, and I would do 4 sets of 25 each, and that's it. Just be consistent. And so I would total 100 of each of those. And during the day I had meetings, and I had a lot of them. and some were at the booth, but mostly it was with potential business partners in the hotel lobby. And so I was able to easily slip away from there at the end of the meetings and go up to my room for my lunch. And it was simple again, just cottage cheese or yogurt, half an orange, some of those crackers, and one little square of that Hue chocolate that I love, and my matcha tea. And then I'd go back to the meetings. And I would do small things like taking the stairs when I could, but I was on the 26th floor, so it wasn't really logical to try to do that. But every night there were required dinners that were already pre-planned, and so I chose the best available options for me, which was steak or meatballs and vegetables or salad. And I know what greens I tolerate, so I try to stick with those, but I wasn't perfect. 2 nights I had thin crust pizza because that was kind of one of the few options, and I did feel that. I felt bloated and my tummy hurt, and I was tired the next day, almost like a hangover. And it really was a helpful reminder to me because it enforced what I already know. And I could have eaten that pizza I could have slid the top off and not had the crust, which is what hurt my stomach. But it just helped me to reinforce that this kind of food just doesn't feel good for me. And I did have a few bites of tiramisu, and that was fine. But the difference now between how I was in the past is that I don't spiral out of control, and that's the biggest change. And even the structure of being there, like walking to the dinners instead of Ubering, and moving when I could. I wasn't rigid. I was just intentional. And here's something important. And I didn't worry that a few days off would ruin everything, because I don't think like that anymore. In fact, it was probably good for me to have this kind of interruption because the body adapts, and so doing the same things all the time over and over isn't always better, and sometimes variation is key, and that's part of the process. On the flight home, though, I just crashed. All that adrenaline just wore off, and I fell asleep trying to read. And I had planned to go for a walk when I got home, but I didn't. I was just tired, and that was okay, because that was like a lot of hours of being on, when it's early morning all the way to evening. But Sunday morning before my flight, I listened to a sermon online, and not out of obligation, but because I wanted to be with the body of Christ, even from a distance. And so today I'm back home, and it's awesome to be back in my normal routine. I had a great workout and got back to my regular way of eating, and I just feel recharged, and physically and emotionally and spiritually, and even have some new excitement about my work. And so if you're worried that a trip or a vacation or a few days off is going to throw everything out the window, don't be. Just don't. You can adapt, and you don't have to be perfect. You just have to stay on the same trajectory. And that's true physically and spiritually. And it's the same idea as sanctification. We're not going to be perfect, but it's the direction that you're moving in, and that changes everything. At the meeting, I saw a lot of people that haven't seen me in a year, and I had lost about 20 pounds before the meeting last year, and then another 20 pounds this year. And in the past, when I would receive a compliment on weight loss success, it's like it would embarrass me, and I would feel shame for some reason. And instead of hearing encouragement, I would interpret it as judgment for how I must have looked before, as if I should never have needed to lose weight to begin with. Like they were thinking, wow, she really let herself go. And now I'm proud of it, but not in a cocky kind of look at me way, but in a confident way that this is who I am, and it's who I always wanted to be. Because before, compliments like, wow, you're so skinny, that would just send me into a tailspin. I would binge, and I would deny it, and I would feel just completely exposed. And it's interesting because it wasn't just discomfort that I felt. It was shame. And it was almost like if someone noticed I had lost weight, it was like it was exposing all of my past failures, and at the same time somehow predicting that it wouldn't last. I know that's warped, but instead of receiving it as encouragement, I just heard it as a reminder, of everything I thought that I should have been sooner. And I just didn't know what to do with that. And so I would deflect. I would even look away from whoever was complimenting me. And like I said, spiral into this self-sabotage to undo the very thing that they were noticing about me. And now it's different. Now, when someone says something like that, I don't shrink back. I don't look away. I don't feel like I have to explain it away. I just look directly at them and I smile and I nod and I say, thank you. Yes, I've been working really hard for a long time and I think I've got it figured out for now. And I mean that. Not in a, like I said, not in a look at me way, but in a matter-of-fact way. Because this isn't something that happened overnight. This has been a lifetime. This is years of trying and failing and learning and getting back up and starting again and staying with it. And I think that's the difference, because before I was trying to fix myself, and now I have confidence because this is who I actually am. It's who I was becoming all along, and it's who I always wanted to be. And so when someone notices, it doesn't feel like exposure anymore. It just feels like recognition of the effort and the grace and the change in my actual identity. When before, validation became added pressure not to fail this time. So when someone noticed the change, it kind of highlighted the failure that I thought came before it. And so what's different now, when someone says it, now I can receive it because I know what it took and I know what I am. And so it's different because I'm at peace, because I stayed with it long enough to become different. However, there's another layer to this. I lie about taking tirzepatide. I want to be honest, and I'm okay with sharing that I take hormones. And why do I do that? Because it feels like a cheat, even in small doses, and I don't want people to think that I didn't make all the effort. The muscles and the changes in my body composition are from 5 years of work. And the tirzepatide was just a small piece to get the needle moving. And so why am I ashamed of that? I'm trying to come to grips with this because lying lips is not who I am. That is not godly. Even if it's a small white lie to protect my ego, it's still a sin. And, in some situations, I'm completely open about my journey, even this here, maybe because you all are strangers to me. But in other situations, I am not. And I shared in a recent video that I've used a small amount of tirzepatide, and that was part of my process to progress. But when I'm in a room with colleagues, and even more so with my friends and my family, I don't admit that. And I even deny it when I'm asked directly about it. I mean, I feel like Peter before the rooster crowed. And I just have this fear that if I say it out loud, then everything else that I have done, all the work, is going to get dismissed. And that people will just automatically, oh, that's why, and not see all of the work behind it and all the change and the habits, the training, the consistency, the mindset. And I'm just really struggling with this internal tension, not as a confession or a justification, but just because I want to be honest. And I also don't want my story to be reduced to a medication. But even that hesitation comes from the same place that I used to operate from, and that's fear of being judged. And so, like this need to prove something just to make sure that it counts, to make sure I did it the right way. And I'm still working through this, because the truth is that was just one small piece. It didn't build the muscles. It didn't change my habits. It didn't change my mindset. It didn't teach me how to live this way. But it did help at a certain point to move the needle when I was doing all the things, all the right things, the same diet and exercise habits that I employ now, but I was gaining weight. And I think part of my growth now is learning to be honest about that part without feeling like it takes away from anything, because that's what matters most. It's not how it looks to other people, but what is actually true. And that's still unfolding for me. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.